Welcome back to CoolCouve. This is David Benedictus.
Welcome back. I'm Daria Ruggles.
And today we're talking with Laura Ellsworth from the Council for Homeless. She is the Strategic Partnership and Advocacy Manager. We wanted to talk about what the population of homeless looks like in Clark County. And then we're going to follow this up later and talk about the issue of affordable housing, which of course is driving a lot of these issues. So the first thing I want to mention was in today's paper, there was a full-page ad about the Council for the Homeless. I'm holding it up here. It has a picture of a woman named Lizzie, who was 71 years old, lost her husband, and then started a business, became resilient, and had a stroke and was disabled, and then lost her housing, her apartment, and was living in her car. And then it had this one little comment down on the bottom that I thought was a staggering number. It says, did you know senior households over the age of 55 comprise nearly 1/4 of Clark County's homeless population, 22% of seniors. That was gobsmacking.
So Laura, first of all, welcome. We're very happy to have you. I was wondering if you, in relationship to that article that David is talking about, if you could please tell us what is the history of homelessness that brought us to where we are now?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I think, homelessness in Clark County has existed for a long time. Council for the Homeless was created in 1989 because homelessness was a growing challenge. And people who are houseless have been centered around the downtown area in Vancouver, even before Share House was built. But we've really seen a notable increase in families, seniors, and youth homelessness since 1989, when most people at that time experiencing homelessness were adults without children. And in fact, before the pandemic, our fastest rising demographic of people experiencing homelessness were seniors, which ties directly into the data that we get, which is that people's primary reason for their homelessness is a lack of income and a lack of affordable places to live.
Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about Liz's story that was in the paper today. So someone discovered her, a friend discovered her, this detail, and then hooked her up with the Council for Homeless that helped her find affordable housing. And then there was a story back in the Columbia in December that talked about Loretta and Andrew Stewart, the manager of Plaid Pantry, who rescued her after 2 years in the car. And for whatever reason, people didn't connect her up with services. So what happens there when what resources are available and realistically for people when they lose their housing and they're seniors?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things about people who find themselves living unhoused and in their vehicles or even outside on the streets, I think the thing that's happened to them, unlike some other folks who may be, in that situation or close to that situation, is that they've lost all of their own personal safety nets. I think a lot of us are financially very vulnerable to losing our housing. People say that a lot when I'm out in the community, like, oh, well, we're all only one paycheck away from, and honestly, we have seen that with the pandemic. I mean, it's really shown such a bright spotlight on that very issue, hence the eviction moratoriums and other things that, our government has been doing this past year to directly related to loss of income and housing and health care and safety for that matter. When we're asked to stay home and stay safe and, we can't afford our homes, it impacts public health as well. So I think, for folks, they've lost that safety net. And I think really what stands out to me about the situation with the Plaid Pantry owner and the woman that he helped is that he became her safety net. You know, he stepped up and did what he could to try to help. And you know, it takes all kinds of approaches to help people who are experiencing homelessness. People's reasons for homelessness and their barriers to accessing help and their willingness to access help and the type of help that is successful for them is unique and as varied as we all are as individuals. There's no one size fits all approach to solving homelessness, to getting people housed. And so our homeless crisis response system really incorporates a wide range and a spectrum of types of help. And I think that if you were to take a look, we're actually going to be doing a webinar on April 20th about our 2020 homeless system numbers. And you'll be able to see that there's a tremendous need in our community and many, many people have asked for help. And the fact of the matter is we just don't have the resources to help everyone who asks for it. So it's, you know, it's hard to know. I mean, there's, you know, confidentiality and issues and everything. So it's hard to know what exactly folks have, you know, done before to try to access services, but for whatever reason, this person stepped up, became a personal safety net for this woman and was able to help her, you know, get stably housed. And so that's just one of many things that, you know, is needed and is effective in our community.
And you know, Laura, when you talk about this idea that we've all heard that we're all one paycheck away or one medical event away, there's such a disconnect between that and the way that people perceive homelessness and the homeless. And you know, David and I were just talking about just before you came on about what's in nextdoor.com, and there's such an anger, a fear. One point, however, that is undeniable is that people look at, because of the lack of services, there's homeless encampments, there's garbage. How do we make that connection between the fact of what you just said that we all have in our consciousness and this other reality of the vilification and the fear mongering and the law and order approach?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you know, people definitely get drilled down to a single definition when they experience unsheltered homelessness, which I will say is also about 20% of the entire picture, you know, population of folks experiencing homelessness. It's just the most visible portion of the population, so it tends to be what people think of when they think of homelessness. And really, yeah, they get relegated into this singular definition of who they are as human beings, which is a homeless person. And it's so amazing when you do get somebody stably housed again, how their personality blossoms out and they are now a full human being beyond just, you know, somebody who is homeless. And so I think that's the first thing to recognize as the general public, as housed members of our community, is that people who are homeless are people, and they have personalities and they have likes and dislikes. And, you know, and when you're forced to live outside, I think, you know, you're experiencing trauma, you're in crisis. And your brain isn't functioning the same way as it otherwise would be if your basic needs are being met. So one of the things that I think of often is, you know, what would that first night outside feel like? You know, how would that feel? I know I would personally be, I would feel less than human. I would feel unworthy of people caring about me. I would feel scared. I would be cold. I would be angry. I would feel forgotten and overlooked, and then yet overly scrutinized all at once. And so I think that, you know, that is you know, what people, I think people who are housed are confronted with when they see those camps. And but the reality is we don't have enough shelter for folks. We don't have a place for those folks to go. And everyone has to be somewhere. You know, they're either going to be in a house, they're going to be in an apartment, they're going to be in a hospital, they're going to be in a jail, they're going to be in a hotel, or they're going to be outside. They're going to be in a car, you know. So it's everyone, they live here, they are our neighbors, and they need to be somewhere. So I think, you know, we need more permanent supportive housing for the folks that are what we call chronically homeless. They're the folks that have lived outside the longest. They have physical disabilities. They have other barriers to remaining stably housed. They need the most supports once they are housed. And those are permanent supportive housing is what takes people from the streets and into stable, safe housing. And we just need so much more of it. I think right now we have a waiting list of 900 people who have already been assessed and qualify for permanent supportive housing. So, you know, it just tells you the need, and yet we just don't have enough to meet it.
We just put Proposition 1. How do you know how that's addressing this?
Are you referring to the affordable housing
Yes.
fund that was passed in 2016?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Was that
That's
long
okay.
ago?
Yeah. No, that was definitely a bright spot of the 2016 election. So yeah, so that's a voluntary property tax voted in by residents of the city of Vancouver, and that really has done a lot of great things. It's actually going to be set to expire, I think, in 2023. 2023. It was a 7-year tax, and so it has definitely contributed to things like permanent supportive housing and rental assistance and what we call homelessness prevention, and different aspects of the homeless crisis response system. So it's definitely very, very helpful and has done a lot of good. I think just this year, it's going to fund around 300 affordable housing units. So either through the creation of new ones or the rehabilitate, like the preservation of existing ones that are set to expire. A lot of times with affordable housing, you know, they're set to expire after like 30 to 40 years. And so there's properties that are always coming up for that expiration. So this fund could help keep that going. Another reason why you've seen a big increase in homelessness and lack of affordable housing is because a lot of that was invested 30 to 40 years ago, and it's all, you know, coming due now. So yeah, there just needs to be more of it, and you know, we need to get to where we can. I think the most recent numbers that I have off the top of my head, we were able to shelter about 40% of people who requested it, and we were able to house about 10% of people who requested it. So just as, you know, a general sense of the need and the people need, you know, asking for help, and then what the system is able to provide. And it really does come down to funding.
You used two different descriptions. One was shelter and one was
Housing.
housing, right? What's the difference between those two?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it. So when somebody is in shelter, they are actually still homeless, because shelter is often temporary and time limited. And so according to HUD, they're still homeless. We're not solving homelessness, quote unquote, by putting somebody into shelter. We are, however, meeting basic needs and doing very important life-saving work by putting people into shelter. And emergency shelter is a very, very critical and important piece of our crisis response system. However, it's not housing. So housing is actually exactly what it sounds like. It's it can range from like time limited progressive engagement to help people get back on their feet, and then it could also be permanent supportive housing for people with the highest needs and barriers, and who will always need that support to remain housed.
And when you say support, what kind of support is offered?
Yeah, so it's things like activities of daily living, mental health, behavioral health, physical health. Like I mentioned, people who are chronically homeless have physical disabilities that prevents them from working. And so it's all of those things to help them stay successful in their housing.
And when you say supportive services, I do think of the Navigation Center, Laura, which was somewhat fraught in the community, but was certainly seemed to be serving a purpose. And now it's been closed and it looks like it might actually be sold. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how it served people and the hole that it's left behind, and what the city is planning to do to replace that service.
Yeah, so the Navigation Center was, that experience was just, I think, a really good reminder that housing, both like short-term and long-term, like I just talked about, and permanent housing is really our most, prominently needed service for people who are experiencing homelessness. And I think that it really showed that need was, we need to do more than just provide those basic needs. The Navigation Center did fulfill some things like providing laundry and showers, and they were very much needed. And we really hope that there'll be more opportunities to increase access to those basic needs in the future. So definitely, I think it's it was in some ways very, just indicative of the need that's out there. And I think that, there's lessons to be learned, and there's other ways to meet those needs, I think. And we just need to get, creative in our approaches to it. As far as I know, I don't know a lot about, I think I know what you know as far as the city's plans. I believe they are selling the property, and then the money that is made from that sale will be reinvested into homeless services. And so I think that there are other ways to continue to serve people and to meet some of those needs that the Navigation Center was doing. And I think there are options out there. We're just gonna have to explore them. But we welcome any solutions, any involvement of any, like I said, all the different ways in which we can help meet basic needs for folks, provide services, get people connected to housing and get them stably housed, get them into emergency shelter. All of those things, we welcome as a part of the overall homeless crisis response system, and are happy to see it.
I noticed a little blurb on the news the other day about some volunteers circulating in the homeless areas in Portland, cleaning up the trash. So these were volunteers. And that's one of the things. So you have the homeless camps where they gravitate to and find places underneath overpasses, and over in Delta Park, you see a lot of that coming on the freeway, along the interstate as well. And it seems when you look on social media and things and people are opining about what needs to be done, they focus on things like the trash. And that if there was, are there projects that look at that accept that there's going to be some people that are unhoused and they're going to be living in temporary shelter that they create, but that the city maybe or the agencies, the community, could provide porta potties, and you see those kind of suggestions, pick up the trash and provide portable showers to make people feel at least partly human in that effort, and also to connect them to the community, right? And that's a bridging kind of service that they would have. That way you make connections with people and engage them, and they know who you are and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there definitely are some services. There's something called Talk and Trash through Share, and they actually hire folks who are experiencing homelessness or who've been previously homeless to go out on the cruise. And I know they're still operating, but I think what people have noticed during the pandemic is that in Portland and even to some extent here in Vancouver, the trash crews have not been operating or operating as fully because of the pandemic. And so not only that, but there's a temporary stoppage on doing the camp sweeps and evictions, quite frankly, of folks. So because they are staying home and staying safe by sticking to their camps and their pods of people that they're around. And interestingly enough, early on in the pandemic, all throughout the spring and summer, before people went into congregate winter shelter settings, they were actually not having large amounts of COVID outbreaks because they weren't doing some of the things that the housed population was doing, like, going to restaurants and bars and workplaces and all the things that people have to do when they're around other people of other households. And so unfortunately, once congregate winter shelter opened up, it changed things. I mean, it's not surprising with the way that the virus is transmitted, but yeah, so I think that people are seeing that. I know the city has definitely put some porta potties and hand washing stations at some of the existing encampments, and outreach teams are really trying to help with that, and definitely people can contact the city if there's they're seeing something particularly concerning in their area. And but unfortunately, it's just it's another inequity and issue that the pandemic has shown a light on, which is that people need to be somewhere. They are going to generate trash when they're there, and just like housed people do, we generate trash also. And they're just doing it in public, and they don't have the infrastructure around them to clean it up like we do, like housed people do. So yeah, it's definitely, I just drove through Portland for the first time this weekend, coming back from the beach, and a route that I don't normally go, and I was pretty surprised myself. But I think people also are going to the sides of the freeways because they're not getting bothered either, so it's not an ideal place to be, but they're getting pushed out of neighborhoods. And quite frankly, there just isn't the shelter available, and a lot of people feel safer staying in their tents and in their encampments where they're around people that they're familiar with, and they are afraid to go into a congregate shelter in the midst of a global pandemic. There's a lot of people just doing it out of safety reasons.
So you mentioned that sweeps, that they're evictions. What actually takes place in a sweep?
I think it's just the law enforcement comes by and makes people they'll get rid of their belongings, and the trash, and they'll make them move.
Interesting detail. When I was teaching a class at Clark College, and I invited Council for Homeless in to give a talk on on the issues we're talking about right now, there was a retired county sheriff as a student, and he was talking about that process. And I believe in both states, Oregon and Washington now, when they do a sweep and evictions, they have to take the person's belonging and tag them and put them in storage someplace for them to recover that.
Because they
Yeah,
often have
that's
medications, right? Things that they really need.
yeah, absolutely. That is true. And so, yes, they do try to do that as much as possible. It's, it's tough though, because like one person's trash is another person's treasure, so like it sometimes for folks it can feel like their belongings are getting thrown away when maybe they're, it's somebody else deciding what's worthy of being kept and what's getting thrown away. It's their space, it's their belongings, so I mean, like and we've all had that experience cleaning out our garages and thinking, oh yeah, we're going to purge all this stuff and get rid of it, and then you look at it and say, no, I can't get rid of that, I can't throw that away. I mean, it's the same, like people are people, and so it's tough because other people are making that decision, and they don't have a whole lot of control over that. So,
Does Vancouver keep track of the people that die on the street?
we do have a memorial service for people who have been homeless or who are currently homeless, who have been kind of uh, in the homeless crisis response system, if you will. And so it's kind of a word of mouth, everyone sort of keeps track. And then like last year, it's posted on our website. We did a recording of it because it was virtual this year. And so, yeah, we do a memorial every year, and it's really for the houseless community to honor their peers who have passed away. And yeah, it's we had we made a little board with all the names on it and put it up at the St. Paul Men's Shelter so that people could come by and pay their respects.
Mhm.
In sort of a socially distant, COVID safe manner. And then we had the service actually virtually this year, but normally in non-pandemic times, it's in person at St. Paul's Church. Usually it's on the longest night of the year on the winter solstice. And just a nice opportunity for folks to come together in fellowship and remembrance of people who we've lost.
You mentioned the winter shelters, and those are those are mostly faith communities that run those shelters, those winter shelters.
Yes, our faith community is really a critical partner for providing shelter in the winter. And so we have what's called the Winter Hospitality Overflow Shelters, the WHO, we call it. And they just completed their 18th year. And it's two churches. It's St. Andrew Lutheran Church in Orchards, and they shelter women and families, and I think couples without kids. And then St. Paul's over in downtown Vancouver, and they do single men. And so thankfully, St. Paul's was actually able to become open year round, which is fantastic. But normally the winter overflow shelters are open from November to March, end of March, typically. And this year, was a different experience with COVID and having to sort of, space people out further and take all the precautions for distancing and things like that. And then we also have the help of a few other churches. We have Living Hope Church, and they open up on what's called the severe weather nights, or the nights when the temperature is below 32, or we have a snow event or ice. And so, like, for example, this year, Living Hope, when we had that snow in February, I think they stayed open 24/7 even for like 5 consecutive days, which was a tremendous help. And then we have a few other partners who, between all three of them, cover every night of the week, which is wonderful. So like, Sunday through Tuesday night, it's one church, and then, Wednesday through Friday, it's another, and then Saturday we had another church. And so those churches are River City Church and Emmanuel Lutheran Church, Beautiful Savior Lutheran Church. So yeah, it's really the guests get connected to those shelters through our housing hotline at Council for the Homeless. And then there's other things like, if we have a really bad snow event, Share House can open up their overflow and people are like, we can find space. So yeah, there's people really do step up when, weather gets severe in the winter, and quite frankly, even in the summer, we make plans if we have heat waves, or even like during the smoke event that we had last fall. We also rely on motel vouchers for folks, for very vulnerable folks, and things like that. So
It's so disconcerting though, Laura, when you talk about like that. I mean, that the funding that was allocated 30 or 40 years ago is gone. The idea that this is not something that's addressed systemically, that it's part of our infrastructure. Especially if you look at these elements that you're talking about, that, people, we know that people are only one event away from being homeless, and that it's escalating, and that in that way we reflect what's going on with the housing crisis nationally. Do you know if there's another city, or you were saying earlier about being open to creative ways of looking at things? Is there another city someplace in the country or the world that's doing it better that we can learn from?
yeah, I do want to clarify. So I think while technically we are all, a lot of people are very close to the edge financially, so to speak. The difference is that many of us have safety nets around us. So our friends and our family, they wouldn't let that happen, right? Like, so that's I think the sort of what I wanted to say earlier in terms of like the difference between like, especially, seniors experiencing homelessness. They're on these fixed incomes. Maybe they've outlived all of their, their safety nets, or for whatever reason. Some people, by even their own behaviors, have alienated people around them. So there is a difference between like a lot of us, a lot of people, I should say, having their own personal safety nets versus, the community's social safety nets, that are provided by providers in our community. But
it's distressing to me that we don't address this as a people in a humane nation, supposedly the richest nation in the world. This should not, right, even be an issue.
Yeah.
And if we recognize that people are always going to fall through the cracks, then how do we not have a structure that addresses that we all contribute to for the greater good? Because it makes life safer, it makes community better. So the question that I was what the other one was, are you aware of another place or a city or some place in the country or the world that's maybe doing it well that we could learn from?
Yeah, I think, every community, really does things in a way that, they're trying to do it in the best way that works for them. I will say there's nationwide best practices and standards, and, a lot of requirements, like based on HUD, the Housing and Urban Development federal agency, that, any community that receives federal dollars has to operate by HUD guidelines. And, one of the ways in which they, influence how we can, how our homeless crisis response systems can work to address homelessness is, we have to serve people who are literally homeless, what we call literally homeless, first. I mean, it is a triage approach. So, for example, people who are doubled up, couch surfing, staying with friends, family, like those folks we can't serve those folks. They're not considered homeless by HUD definitions. Students, however, are. So they have allowed for that. It's called the McKinney-Vento, I don't know if law is the right word, but standard, so there's a little more flexibility among students who are experiencing homelessness. Yeah, so we definitely follow best practices, which is, something called rapid rehousing, which is to just get people housed as quickly as possible to reduce that trauma. That's for people who are what we would consider kind of medium need in terms of their barriers to being stably housed. We also do what's called a diversion approach, which is something that is kind of for people with the least amount of barriers, it's the lightest touch approach. Sometimes it's just like, some very basic financial assistance to help somebody get into a new apartment. Move-in costs are outrageous. The average move-in costs in Clark County are $3,500. So if you're already on the edge of homelessness, you're not going to have that kind of money in the bank. So if that's what they need, but they're working and they just have to get back and find a place to live, we do that at Council for the Homeless, and that's what our system provides for folks. So there's a spectrum. I would say on one end it's diversion for the lowest barriers, lowest need, I'd say, people. And then on the other end, it's the permanent supportive housing, which is for the chronically homeless, people with disabilities, mental health, behavioral health issues, substance use issues. And so that is just like get people stably housed so that they can then begin to address those other issues. And it's permanent. Like there's a lot of them are older, they're not gonna be able to do it on their own.
One of the things we talked about in our larger conversation about public safety and community services is mental health and people involved in substance abuse, drawing attention from law enforcement. So I was thinking, just to, off the cuff, to think about, or perhaps you have been involved in conversations coordinating services between mental health and substance abuse and supported housing environment. So what kind of mental health services and substance abuse services are available in supported housing? And I think about that when I look at social media, and people are saying, they just throw up their hands and say, well, these people don't follow rules, they can't be in supported housing because they have mental illness and substance abuse.
So it's definitely connected. By definition of the permanent supportive housing, the word supportive is the key word in that. So it's definitely they're tied with that type of housing. So and I will say permanent supportive housing, once those supportive services got connected really robustly to that, the success rate became 100%. So there's different types of permanent supportive housing, I will say as well. So there's what we call site-based, which is places like Lincoln Place, over by Share House. The Elwood just opened up a few weeks ago, and that housed like 46 individuals who have been chronically homeless. And so we partner with other organizations to address behavioral health and physical health needs for those folks. So, and then there's also scattered site permanent supportive housing. So that's just kind of like different, they're just all around town, and there's actually probably more of that type of permanent supportive housing than there is of the site-based in our community. Although I do think there's some more investments being made into that as we speak. It just takes time. A lot of the funding has been increased. I will say, like in recent years, there has been a lot of political will in our state legislature. And then in this past year with COVID at the federal level, that money is coming into the community. A lot of it's prevention focused right now due to the pandemic, but there are significant investments being made into permanent supportive housing and emergency shelter, two things that we didn't have enough of before. So I do have hope that there's going to be a change and a shift. It just as these funds are able to come into the community, and the time it takes to build things and to renovate things and to create new shelter. I mean, you know, that the Bertha's place, the new Howard Johnson site over by the mall, like that's gonna happen this year. It just takes time to get things up and running, but there's definitely things happening that you know, that I feel are going to be very positive for the overall system, and we're finally going to start having some of the resources that we have needed for so long. So it's interesting. I think there was a period of time when homelessness was really connected to depressions and recessions in our country as a whole. And then this most recent wave of homelessness, though, really has been about housing affordability and lack of it. And so, and that is so perfectly illustrated by the fact that it's people on fixed incomes that are losing their housing, you know, and it's, you know, retired people, it's people who aren't going to be able to work their way out of homelessness, you know. So it really is about having an affordable place to live for people who are very low income in our community. And we just, you know, we need more of it. And I do think that there are investments being made into it. And so I think it's going to take some time, and this pandemic has really, you know, created there will be some effects from this when the eviction moratoriums get lifted. There's going to be stuff we're going to have to work to get ourselves back out of that. But overall, I think we're moving in the right direction in terms of knowing what we need to do, how to do it efficiently, and having the funds to do it.
I think about that inherent in equity. I read in the New York Times. So meanwhile, these people that you're mentioning that cannot work their way out because they're seniors and they need housing, that the very rich are buying 3 and 4 houses now. And if you could decide, Laura, like, okay, for Vancouver, if you could make your own plan, your own dream come true, how would you see us being able to make that happen? Let's just pretend you can make it happen any way you want. What would you want us to do here in Vancouver?
I would like to see more basic needs being met by people who are living outside. So more bathrooms, more laundry facilities, more showers, more, you know, places for them to take care of their trash, you know. So on that end of things, there's that, like, that's kind of like the immediate, you know, you know. And then ultimately you get people housed, you know, you get people connected to services, you get them housed so that they can rest and start to address the other challenges that they're having that have contributed to their experience with homelessness in the first place. It's really hard to address mental health if you don't have a way to keep your meds safe. It's really hard to increase your job skills if you can't do your laundry and take a shower and keep your documents safe. It's, you know, all of the things that keep people stably housed require them to be stably housed. So I think ultimately we get to what's called functional zero, which is, you know, societies have people who have high needs who end up in the situation where they are homeless, but we get them housed again as really quickly so that trauma is reduced, and those other impacts to the community of them being unhoused are not, you know, felt. I think that's the bottom line, is there's this idea of who's deserving of help and who isn't, and, you know, that needs to go away. Everyone deserves a place to live. That there's just no value judgment there, you know. I mean, it helps us all. It helps everybody when everyone is housed and has a place to be. So I think that's ultimately that homelessness becomes rare, and if it does happen, it's very, very brief. And then, you know, we meet people's needs, you know, where they are, and recognizing that people who are outside, they may tell you that that's their choice or that they want to be out there, that they prefer it. They may not want to go into shelter. The reasons for that are as human and as varied as we all are as individuals. But I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to tell somebody, this is my choice, than I really messed up, or I, don't have control over my situation and I don't want to be here. That's really hard for people. It's understandable that people say like that they want to be outside, but I really, if we can truly meet their needs where they are, that's not what they want, and sometimes meeting those needs where they are is just building that trust. It's just initially taking it very slow, because quite frankly, people also feel frustrated and let down, and they get their hopes up and then nothing happens. And so it's a lot of, there's a lot of walls of protection up around people who are outside for a long time too. So and again, I want to stress, like, this is not the majority of people experiencing homelessness. People are living with in their cars, they're living in motels, they're living in with friends and family. There are a lot of people experiencing homelessness that we don't see, that are working, that are getting back on their feet, that you know that the general public doesn't necessarily even know about, or is not concerned about, because they're not seeing it. So
When you say that, I think about a local elementary school that's in my neighborhood that has 65% poverty level. And the mental health support specialists that are in that school talk about the number of homeless kids that are dropped off at the elementary school, grade 1, kindergarten through 5, every morning. And you think about how a kid could learn in that, have that unstable, chaotic environment of living in a car, have poor nutrition, access to food. So our neighborhood has adopted the school along with the local church, and we just pour food into that school, and then support for the families as much as we can. But the housing issue is a huge thing for those families, and those are the hidden. I think about those as some of the hidden families. They're going to school with your kids, but they're living in their car or couch surfing, something like that.
yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, it intersects with everything, right? Like all manner of life and ability to housing is the root, right? It's just that very basic bottom of the pyramid.
So, Laura, when I think of people watching this, and all this information and some of the fear and the concern, like, it's very interesting to know that the amount of people that we see out on the streets or in homeless encampments actually are only 20%. That means that there's a lot more going on than most of us are seeing. What do you think that people who are watching this right now and want to be helpful in some way, how would you advise folks to try to help in any way they can?
Yeah, I think, dispel myths,
Mm.
and reduce stereotypes. Let's try to see people who are living outside, and even in shelters and in housing, transitional housing, recovery housing. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways in which people who are homeless are surviving right now. Let's not reduce them to their housing status. They're people, and they're people who are in trauma and in crisis, and I think just they're simultaneously people who are invisible, and also just their every move is scrutinized and judged and resented, and recognize that most people want to be inside, they want a place to live, and, trying to connect them to services as best we can. Being, just being kind. We say that a lot at Council for the Homeless. Just be kind. It really does go a long way. And recognize that we really just need more affordable places for people to live in our community. Like, that's the bottom line. If there was an affordable place for people to live, they wouldn't be homeless. And so there's ways in which we can help people get back on their feet as quickly as possible. And I think advocating for permanent supportive housing, emergency shelter, and just, doing our best to remember people and help them, have regular access to meeting basic needs goes a long way. I was thinking about it the other day, even something like laundry or showers. If you didn't even know when your next shower or ability to do your laundry was, how motivated would you even be to do it at all, right? Like, you're kind of allowing yourself this creature comfort that it might be more painful to allow that and not know when you could have it again than to just never have it, so I just think the better we can do with helping people feel like they're not forgotten and they're not invisible, and that they are worthy of housing. I think that seems to me the key. And yeah, I want people to know that they're our neighbors. They're complex and full human beings. We don't go and introduce ourselves as like, hey, I'm Laura, I'm housed. I'm a housed person. Like, that's not how we identify ourselves. So why are we identifying people living outside as homeless as the main label,
It's like the difference between slaves and people who are enslaved.
Exactly. It's that person first language, because they are a person first before their housing status. But ideally, we will have more resources and continue to use best practices that we know are effective, that we know are the best use of the dollars that we have, the limited dollars that we have, and really try to do the most good that we can, for folks. And again, it just, it's not an easy group to work with, at times, but it's so important, and it is worth it to do it, so yeah. And recognizing that people are individuals, it's, you also, just know, like, if you choose to engage with somebody outside, recognize that, it could be received in all the ways in which things can be received. Might be received good, it might not be received well. So just recognize that as well.
One homeless person or a person experiencing homelessness is not representative as an identity of homelessness.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Just like one person who's housed isn't representing all the housed people.
I think about this other aspect of outer entities coming in. And I don't know, I'd love to know from both of you, like, how do we have this conversation about how can Vancouver protect Vancouver and our own neighbors? Because, like, for example, this whole housing crisis with rentals, from what I understand, there's been like corporations coming in and buying these. They buy these places up, and then they turn right around and do a minimal maintenance, and then the rents skyrocket for these people, often and I don't directly, people who are older and lived on fixed incomes. And I have no idea, I'm just asking you two, how can we do this? How how can we help maybe city council or create an awareness so that we are behaving like a community, taking care of our neighbors? Got any ideas?
Well, that there's been several articles, and there was the New York Times summarizing that that since the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, the foreclosed houses were being bought up by the investment banking industry, and then initially they were couching in terms of rescuing it. They had the money, they had the capital to buy it up, and they wanted to keep the housing stock available. But then after they did that, they started getting into their shareholder interest to reduce the cost of maintenance on the properties. And they did that using a not very compassionate metric, which was, we're spending too much on maintenance, and we're going to stop painting, and we're going to send out, we're not going to have maintenance staff on available. We're going to do contracts with individual community contractors, and we're also going to raise the rents 11% every year to meet the shareholders' needs for those investments. So that's what's driving that, is this
Greed.
for-profit greed, right? That is I'm trying to be diplomatic here. That is a dark hole in the capitalist soul, is that we think about profit as going to serve everybody, it's going to trickle down, right? But really what it does is that it strips away the infrastructure and the support in favor of profit. And that's it was stunning. I mean, there are corporations that now go in and buy up whole neighborhoods,
Exactly.
whole neighborhoods, and then they look at cost effectiveness and efficiencies, and then they merge with other companies that go on and on and on, and then it's driven solely by the bottom line. And so they stop responding. So think about, the slumlords, right? So now they're corporate slumlords, basically. And they're not returning calls. They're doing poor maintenance on houses and letting them go in disrepair, and raising the rents at the same time to feed the shareholders' need for profit. It's stunning in its lack of compassion and humanity, to say the least. So I would thinking, well, city council and county council and the legislature says, you can't do that in our state, in our community. You can't do that. You need to have these kind of guidelines and rules. So we're always kind of playing catch up and trying to catch the people that are looking for that niche where they can make money. And I think there was a book written about that called Disaster Politics, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
And Naomi Klein speaks a lot about this.
So disaster capitalism, it wasn't disaster politics, but so there's this opportunistic and predatory streak in capitalism that takes advantage of vulnerable communities.
Which is so ironic because, of course, that's the reason that we have unsafe communities. And then their answer is to sell people guns, more guns. So, talk about a profoundly vicious cycle.
Yeah, well, that's why we're here. So
in our own tiny way,
right.
trying to help amplify good things like what you're doing, Laura, with Council for the Homeless, which, by the way, so is Council for the Homeless, forgive my ignorance, is that a nonprofit that cooperates with the city, or are you city funded? How does Council for the Homeless get their funds?
Yeah, so we were actually created through the foresight of the Vancouver City Council, the Clark County, or I should say it's the City of Vancouver, Clark County, and the Vancouver Housing Authority in 1989. And so because, like I mentioned earlier, they recognize that homelessness, it was a growing problem in our community. So we are a nonprofit organization, but we do get funding from the state, the state government, the federal government, and our local government. So Clark County is actually the biggest funder of homelessness, the homeless services in our community. The city is definitely a very important partner in the work that we do. They've really invested a lot more over recent years, and even just this during the pandemic, they helped fund a shelter through Living Hope Church during the summertime. They have increased porta potties. They provided a safe parking site throughout the pandemic for people in cars and RVs. So there's definitely lots that the city is doing, and the county and the state, and now the federal government as well, through the federal stimulus acts that have been passed. So and then we also rely on private philanthropy just from the community as well. One of the things that is nice about private philanthropy that comes into our agency is that it's flexible funding that our service providers can, use in the way that is most appropriate for the needs that people have. A lot of times, federal dollars come with lots of different,
Mhm. Boxes to check.
regulations and ways in which things can be spent, and documentation, and all of that ties into equity. And it's all of that. But yeah, we're definitely a private nonprofit entity as well, but we do rely on federal and state and local dollars.
What about lobbying? Do you do any lobbying at all?
We do just like issue-based, funding-based. We don't engage in electoral work at all, but one of my roles at Council for the Homeless is around advocacy. So we work really closely with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance to help advocate for bills, and also for funding from our state government, state legislature, to bring funding for our homeless crisis response system into Clark County. So this particular legislative session, there's a lot of work being done around tenant protections and funding for emergency shelter, in particular, increased funding to do more things like the motels, which are really a new type of emergency shelter model, where people have their own rooms and their own bathrooms. It's that non-congregant emergency shelter, which sometimes, the nature of emergency shelter, there's folks with really high needs and barriers who wouldn't be able to be in that congregant emergency shelter setting. So this is a much better option for them to have that privacy and individual space. And so we're advocating for funding for more permanent supportive housing, more money for the Housing Trust Fund in Washington State, which helps build affordable housing and preserve existing affordable housing. And I will say, in recent legislative sessions, there's been some great investments made into the Housing Trust Fund. And there's still more of a need out there. One of the really crucial pieces of legislation that we're working on this session is to increase funding for our homeless crisis response system through the document recording fee, which is a fee that is part of closing costs during any real estate transaction or like a refinance. And it's directly tied, to real estate. And it traditionally has been, right now it's $85 per real estate transaction. We're asking for $100 increase, but it's really anticipated to generate, hundreds of millions of dollars for our state. which would come back to our county. It's also uniquely a good thing for Clark County, because the document recording fee revenue that's generated here would stay here for our homeless crisis response system, whereas a lot of other things, Clark County tends to be what we call a donor county in our state, which we send the revenue to the state and then it does not all come back to us because it goes to other areas that have more population. So this is one type of funding that would actually stay here, which is also very, very good for our county in particular. Yeah, just more, I think, more investments into funding the programs that we know work, that we know are needed, and so that's it's moving through the legislature. It may actually be voted on this week, hopefully, and in the Senate. It's already passed the House, so for those civics nerds out there, it needs to pass the House and the Senate. They need to agree on it, and then basically sign off on that, and then it would go to the governor for his signature. So
Well,
we're not there yet. There's still some hurdles to jump over, but it's moving, and I feel cautiously hopeful that it's going to pass. It's not an easy one though. I mean, it's I think we just raised it by like $35 recently, and prevented it from actually ending. It was due to sunset, and so we had to fight just to keep it alive, keep it going, and then increase it a little bit. So this would be a big increase, but as we've talked about, it's very much needed. And right now the real estate market is bonkers, so it would generate a lot of revenue for our system, which is great, because I think that this bonkers real estate market has been a big driver of what's created the current need. But at the same time, if things go down, if there's a recession, and real estate goes down again, then the funding for the homeless crisis response system also goes down. So the primary source of funding here.
So I forgot one thing when I was talking about the capital investment firms. What they're doing is they're creating that bonkers system, as you describe it, because they're going in with cash and driving up the prices by 10, 20, 30%. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
So it's cash money buyers going in that are moving the middle class out of even purchasing homes, and then forcing the prices up so that even rentals that are available in the community are limited.
And David, another part of that is that like they'll get somebody that's a full price buyer, like in Portland, this was happening, and it doesn't matter that they're full price. They'll go with the cash person because they're offering cash. And then what ends up happening is perfectly beautiful family homes are demolished and ruin an entire neighborhood so that they can create this model that you're talking about.
So that's really good news that the trust fund is going to be supported by more by this bill. What's the bill's name?
Well, the Housing Trust Fund is a budget issue, actually. There's still, the Senate and the House are still kind of negotiating over their versions of the budget. But the bill around our document recording fee increase which is the main funder of the homeless crisis response system, is House Bill 1277.
Do any property taxes go to help people experiencing homelessness or low-cost housing?
Just the one that the city of Vancouver residents voted for.
Proposition 1.
I think it was. So that one is a voluntary temporary property tax for residents in the city of Vancouver.
Temporary, which makes me think that when you were just talking about housing relating to being able to have houses, that there's nothing historically in property taxes. It goes to, they give you that little wheel and it shows you all these things, but there is never anything systematically in place to help with this. That's not part of it, right?
Yeah, I think they typically tend to go towards other priorities. So yeah.
I know that mosquito is part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and schools and roads and, all those other pesky things that we
That we need,
rely on.
but we need this too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's why investments into like the housing trust fund and, and there's arguments to be made too, quite honestly, about like tying things to the real estate market, tying revenue to the real estate market, because it is, always at risk of, when the real estate market goes down, then homelessness needs go up, and then now the revenue's going down, and
Yeah, like, so no, whatever happens, it seems like the people at risk are always more at risk.
exactly, exactly, yeah. Because in this case, this has really been caused by the recovery, right? Like the first thing that went up in 2014-ish, when things were starting to get better after the 2009, 2010 recession, was, housing price, like property values, right? Like all of a sudden everyone's like, wow, my house is worth so much now. This is great. It's like, yeah.
But then your property taxes go up quite a lot too. There's, and meanwhile, the inequity grows, right? The billionaires, I forget, you probably know this, David, there's some like the top 1% of the 1%, their wealth grew by like 1 point something trillion or something like that. And meanwhile, we're trying to scrape together all of these disparate funding streams to try to address a perennial need.
Yeah, and Washington State is very regressive in our tax structure in general. So the top income earners in our state pay a rate of about 2.4% of their taxes, and the bottom income earners in our state pay about 16% of their income.
Wow.
That qualifies for regressive.
Yeah.
It does. It does. Well, this has been a very, very helpful conversation, and there is more to come in terms of talking about affordable housing. We're going to turn next and bring people on who are going to talk about the housing stock available and who coordinates that in Clark County, and what's being done at the statewide level as well.
Maybe we can find some heroes out there, some good advocates that we can.
I'm sure.
I know that Sharon Wiley, for example, I'd like to have her. Sharon Wiley has got what she calls it a circuit breaker on property taxes, because Laura, the numbers that you just spoke about, or that trend in terms of taxation and the regressive taxation that we have here, it's also falling very much on lower income people with property taxes. So and that seems really strange. It's such a disincentive for people. It seems like if you're living in your house and you're just living there minding your own business, you shouldn't be you shouldn't be so horribly taxed. I mean, if it's worth a lot, then pay it in the end and have a chunk of that go to low cost housing and people experiencing homelessness. I mean, spread it out so it's more equitable. But I'd love to connect with people that are perhaps also addressing some of these needs systematically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say, a lot of, for as much as it seems like, there's a need out there that, just isn't being fully met, there's a lot of good people out there that have persisted even through this pandemic to continue to serve people, to get them sheltered, to get them housed. And, my hat's off to them, because they really are, just plugging away, doing the work, getting it done. And I'm very grateful for all of the service providers in our community, and all of the people and groups and grassroots agencies that go out and do everything from like feeding people to, supporting people once they're housed, to sitting down with folks and just helping them plan out what their plan is for trying to get housed again. And all of those people are needed. They're also important. They're also integral. And and really just having that kind of variety of ways in which people are being served, being connected with, it's needed. And I'm just personally so grateful for anyone in our community who's willing to insert themselves into somebody else's trauma and crisis to try to help. We always have helpers. I'm just always blown away by the helpers in our community, and never before have I seen people stand up to do that at their own personal risk sometimes. Like with the pandemic, we had people out there working in shelters and serving people, that it's very heartwarming and just amazing, that our community really does work together to come together to help people. So,
You're one of those people, Laura. So we are grateful to you, and we thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today and give us a new perspective and some encouraging and enlightening conversation. Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So stay cool and stay curious, and it's cool to be compassionate.
That's David. Yes. Bye, everybody.
Bye.